There's a lot happening with New Jersey's child welfare system. We want to help you make sense of it and share our story. This is DCF on the Air.
This is DCF on the Air, and I'm Jason Bukowski. In child welfare, we love a good monthly designation. April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. May is Foster Care Month. November is Adoption Month. June happens to be Reunification Month. Reunification is something that we don't talk a lot about as a system, but it's always the primary goal whenever we have to remove a child from their biological family. We're always looking to make sure that we're working towards that goal. It's not something we can always achieve, but it's always the goal for all children in our placement. Today we're going to be talking with a system administrator for our Office of Resource Families, as well as one of our resource families that's working to really make sure that New Jersey can achieve the goals of reunification for the majority of the children that come into placement. So I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with the questions.
I'm Manish Vaziri, Assistant Director for the Office of Resource Families. Happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Lauren Shalish. I'm a resource parent in Mercer County.
Justin Roth. I'm a Mercer County resource parent as well.
Welcome to DCF on the Air. We're so happy to have you here. So my first question, and I think this is probably more for you, Manoush, is about the continuum of placement options and permanency options for children in care, whether it's resource placement, kinship placement, adoption. What does that look like? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. So like you pointed out, it is a continuum, right? There are a range of settings for out-of-home care, from the least restrictive, most family-like settings to, more structured, more treatment-oriented settings. It really depends on the unique needs of the child. For most children in out-of-home care, it would be the least restrictive. That's what we always strive for, the most family-like setting. So that would be our traditional resource parents or our kinship resource parents. And in New Jersey, we've replaced the term foster parent with resource parent because we really believe that they are a valuable partner and resource to not only the children in their care, but to the families, to the community, as well as to the child welfare system as a whole. And we sort of use resource as an umbrella term for our foster, adoptive, and kinship parents. So children can be in kinship resource care, which would be could be relatives, could be extended family members, family friends, or really anybody who has a significant emotional connection to the child or their family. And then there's also our traditional resource parents, what people commonly refer to as foster parents. And then if for some reason that's not possible, right, or the child's needs require a higher level of care, then we do have our group home settings, our residential treatment programs, psychiatric settings. Those are really meant to be more time limited and to really serve a specific purpose around the needs of the child. And of course, at any point in time, the child's needs could change, right? So they might move up or down along that continuum, but our goal is always to have them in the least restrictive setting possible.
Yeah. And I think one of the important caveats when we think about resource placement is that the intention is for that to be temporary.
Exactly.
Whether they move on to an adoptive home, sometimes the resource parents become adoptive parents.
Yes.
Or they reunite with their family of origin. I'm wondering, going back to the concept of reunification, what is the percentage of children in placement that do reunify with their biological parents?
So the most common goal, as you had mentioned before, is reunification for children in out-of-home care, and that actually is the most common outcome as well for children exiting care. So in April, our numbers were around 65% of children who were exiting care were reunified with their families.
Okay. And how does that compare with the national average?
So the latest data from Children's Bureau, our federal partners, for 2022 was around 52%. That was the national average.
Okay, so we're about or a little bit exceeding the national average, well, especially for April.
And we've been trending up in the last few years. And I think something important to keep in mind is that, when we think of reunification, we want to think about the complex challenges that families are facing, right? And as they're working towards reunification, we want to make sure that they have really strong supports in place so that reunification can be lasting. And in fact, our reentry rates, I think, speak to that, right? Our reentry into foster care have been really dramatically declining over the last several years. So I think that is really a testament to our commitment to just making sure that we're very planful and strategic in planning for reunification to make sure that it's lasting and it's safe.
Great. Speaking of those supports that really help families stay together, I'm wondering, and I guess this is for the entire panel, what ways can resource families be a support to the reunification process? Can you share some ideas or some thoughts on that?
Sure. There's lots of different ways resource families can be a support to reunification. From the moment that a child is entering out-of-home care, we're actively working towards reunification, and resource parents really play a central role in helping to support that goal, working with us towards, achieving the goals of the case plan, maintaining connections with the child's family, extended family, siblings, helping to facilitate visits, and little things like just, staying in touch with the family, letting them know how their children are doing, asking questions about their children. So like, what are their likes and dislikes? What are their usual routines so that you can keep that normalcy and that consistency as much as possible, and help give them a level of comfort, right? And really the most important thing, I think, is just staying connected. It could be through emails, through phone calls, texts, video calls, right? Passing along notes. You can use the caseworker to kind of assist with that facilitation and making those connections, or to navigate any questions or challenges you may have. So there's really just a range of different ways that you can help support reunification.
Just as Manoush mentioned, communication is so critical in this area because you want to keep the child connected to the family as much as possible. So one of the things that we found, and you mentioned, was sending notebooks back and forth on some of the weekly visits. You can share how doctor's visits went, any milestones that the children may have had while they're with you. And that notebook provides that open communication and connection as well. And going to your point on keeping visits, the flexibility in that we found is really, really important. Because, visits change, there's holiday schedules, and having that flexibility so that the children and their birth parents can have as much time together as possible really supports that reunification effort. With that, we also found that keeping the communication open regarding cultural or religious traditions so that we can support those in the house as well, just to keep any of those aspects of their life that they're used to seeing consistent in both places that they have lived.
And there's certainly extenuating circumstances, but we generally try to maintain positivity around the time of visits and the kind of communication that we can have in between. Kind of one of the quotes that guides us in our work is that we understand that children might want their parent to be different, but they don't want a different parent. And so we understand our role as not replacing the family that they have, but more as a support system, being a resource for the family. And also just trying to empathize and understand what the bio family might be going through kind of guides our work, and our sensitivity to what the children might also be experiencing. And finally, just, maintaining connections to siblings if it's a large sibling group, if not all of the siblings are in our care, that, as much as we can with visits with siblings too, to support that connection in addition to the parents.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think that's a great philosophy to take, that I really love that quote, that, they may want their parents to be different, but they don't want different parents. Thinking about sort of the temporary nature of a resource placement, I can imagine that it might be emotionally difficult to consider that. But I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experiences, providing that temporary safe shelter as the family does the work to ultimately, hopefully, come back together.
Yeah, we are always in full support of reunification, and all of our cases have resulted in reunification with their birth families, which has been really, really nice. In a lot of ways, we found that having a temporary placement is a lot like parenting any other child. The one caveat is that you're coming at it through a lens of mitigating trauma. So that part's a little bit different and individualized based on each child's needs. That helps create a sense of belonging. If we can do that when we implement a schedule and a routine for the child as well. So it helps reduce some of the anxiety that they may have with the change in homes. If we can create a stable, safe place so they can navigate through the day and anticipate what's coming next. With respect to some of the things that we have done, that flexibility has been really, really key, and understanding that we are flexible around visits, we're flexible around communication with the parents and sort of meeting them where they are.
And one of the things we try to do as soon as the children arrive is maintain a familiar routine for them, both that maybe matches things that make them feel comfortable, but also so they have a sense of security and safety in our own home, especially around, food and kind of caretaking. It can also be kind of tempting knowing how many people you interface with as a resource parent, right? There's legal guardians, caseworkers, resource workers, et cetera, who are wonderful resources. It might trend toward you wanting to better understand the case and case management. But that's an area we try to really avoid in our work, to not think so much about the long-range planning and long-term goals, because there are really qualified professionals that, are committed to that work. And our focus is really making each day good for the children. How do you keep their spirit intact? What are the small wins that you can have on a day-to-day basis? Because there's so much gray area too, that can come with reunification, that also provides a sense of stability, that we can really just focus on the day ahead and not, future outcomes that are possible.
Sure. One of the things with New Jersey's child welfare system is that we do guarantee confidentiality for families that are involved with our system. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering if you mentioned the small wins, the day-to-day wins. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what those are, without, giving too much identifying information away.
There's a few ways to probably answer that question, but when we've had sibling groups, a lot of times the older sibling may have had more caretaking responsibilities with their birth parents and bio family. That's not something that we try to absolve them of entirely, because that may provide a sense of security for them. So rather than requiring them to have that responsibility, we do try to find ways that they can participate in the routines of the day. And even just opportunities to be playful, to be outside, to engage with other kids in their age, to just, I keep saying this, but to keep their spirit intact is really the most important piece. One of the other things is, if the kids feel comfortable, creating spaces for them to share their interests or things that they like to do. And when they have success with those things, like maybe it's going to gymnastics, or maybe it's a, achievement at school that they've learned to write their name, or they did something that was very generous and helpful around the house. Just that we acknowledge what they've been doing, so they also feel like they have a sense of control and safety where they are, but recognizing that they have agency as well is something that we try to do to support the kids in big and small ways. So that can be kind of routines around the house that they want to help with, whether it's like cooking or getting ready for school. And also, bigger achievements, and just trying to celebrate those wins on a day-to-day basis and create a sense of positivity and safety.
Yeah, another aspect of that is creating space for them to talk about their family when they're ready. We're in a position where we don't want to or can't pretend birth parents don't exist, because reunification is the goal and we want to keep that connection as strong as possible. So we leave space for them to talk about their parents when they're ready. We ask how the visits went, what they want to do on the next visit with their parent. And so we try to keep that birth parent top of mind as well.
Thinking about those major achievements, and this is kind of top of mind for me, and I'll share that yesterday I went to see my kids, my son's final baseball game in middle school, my daughter's final concert in middle school with the choir and the band, and being able to celebrate those milestones with them. I'm wondering, how do you keep the biological families in the know on those milestones? Because I think those moments of achievement and those are really formative, I think, for the children, and making sure that the bio parents can also share in those things. Because I know for me, my daughter started singing. She had a solo yesterday, and I was just a mess. And to think about, like, how can we make sure that bio parents get that experience of, celebrating with their children, and still continuing to do that even if the child is an out-of-home placement.
Just a quick, simple piece is sending photos back and forth on visits. So when there is a concert at school, taking photos and printing a physical copy that can be brought on a visit. We've also done short video recordings that can be emailed as well. So those are some of the things to capture that moment in time.
And if they're school-age children or they're in a daycare program, just keeping that open communication with the providers in those settings or the educators. Is it possible to make 2 copies of the program? Could we send, an extra copy of the report card on the next visit? Any artwork or achievements, save a program from kindergarten graduation, that kind of thing. That also provides a nice connection when the kids go on visits, that they have a positive aspect to focus on about, how they're growing and what they're accomplishing and how they're contributing and just becoming their own person.
Yeah. Great. Thinking about, because it's an emotional thing for the child to be in placement. It's an emotional thing for the family to work towards reunification, to heal from those wounds that put them in this position in the first place. And it might be intergenerational trauma. It might be adversity and trauma from childhood that's manifesting in adulthood. There could be a ton of reasons why they're in this position. But thinking about your own experiences, how do you navigate the emotional challenges of being resource parents and providing safety and love to the children that are in your care?
I think it's always an emotional process for sure. And one of the things that has served us well is becoming familiar with holding 2 competing feelings at the same time, and being able to understand kind of the gray area that goes with this. But wishing it was under different circumstances, but grateful for the opportunity to know the children and to have them as part of your family, and happy that they can be reunified, even though it is an experience of loss. One thing that we've realized through the process of reunification is that with other life events, there tend to be rituals or ceremonies like weddings or funerals, where we ritualize the meaning of a really significant event. And sometimes around reunification, there isn't that cultural awareness. And so as a family, we've tried to just create our own process for reunification. So knowing that The division and the caseworkers have their timeline and, standards that have to be met. We, of course, want to comply with all of those. But can we create a special moment on our own timeline with the child to say thank you and goodbye in a way that's meaningful to them, that creates another positive memory, so they associate us as part of a larger support system and community of care. And we try to leave it open and defer to the bio parents about continuing any kind of connection or relationship, but we really follow their lead on that. For some, they've chosen to, close out this chapter, and rightfully so. Others, just through an email here and there on birthdays, or trying to do a video visit, we've been able to just maintain that connection with children, so they're not experiencing another loss in their life.
Yeah, one thing that often gets asked is, isn't it hard when they have to go back? And one of the things that we say to people would be, if it doesn't hurt, you're not doing it right. And that's not to say there's a right or wrong way to provide foster care and be a resource parent, but it gives people who are unfamiliar with working within the system an idea of, you are supposed to connect, you are supposed to welcome them into your family, you're supposed to fall in love with them, and that's how you're able to provide the best care for them when they are with you. One of the things, another quote that we often use is, we risk our own discomfort so that children and youth have a stable place to land. We are brave, but children are braver.
Fantastic. I love that. Keep the quotes coming. I think that's really inspiring and inspirational for, I think, people that want to do this work, to provide a resource to families in need. They need to hear that.
Yeah, we have that one in particular hanging on our fridge so that we see it when there's times of frustration, because there always is in every process. But it reminds us that, we're here for the kids, and they're being very brave through this process as well.
And I would just add, it is an emotional process. It can feel like a loss. And to make sure that you have your own support network and support system in whatever way, that takes shape for you. So just to be able to lean on that when the children do go home. Because even though with all our kids who've returned home, that's the goal that we've wanted, but you also never stop thinking about them. We still acknowledge their birthdays. We'll just go out and have donuts or something as a way, for the other kids in our home to remember that kind of connection and to share memories. And to the extent that we can, we've kept photos of them around the house, which has helped other kids in care transition into our home, and to know that the outcome that we're really focused on is reunification.
So other than the best donut shops in Mercer County, what is one thing that you wish you knew about the reunification process before taking the leap into becoming resource parents?
A few ways to answer that. One thing that I think, whether people are involved with the division or not, just as awareness about the foster care system, is that there is not a type of foster kid. So sometimes they get classified as a particular group, or there's a certain characteristic or stereotype that we might associate with foster children, and none of that is true. And we try to use the term kids in care instead, to focus on the fact that they're children, their experiences are varied, there is, this is an experience they share, but there's not a characteristic otherwise that unifies them, other than that they've had experience in foster care. One other thing that maybe surprised us about the process is sometimes questions that other people might ask. And we've learned over the years to try to take a proactive approach. We know what people might be curious about now, so we try to address that before maybe there's an uncomfortable situation where they ask a question about the child who might, be standing with us. And all of it is well-intentioned and well-meaning, but we're trying to do our best to kind of tell people how we want to acknowledge the experience of foster care for the kids. So, with neighbors and friends, that we reinforce the idea when the kids come that it is a good thing, that, we're happy they're part of our community now. But we also want to leave time for them to be sad and process their feelings. But we want them to have a sense that they are safe here and that they are valued and we consider them part of the community. Other times people might say something like, oh, they're so lucky to be with your family. And that sounds very nice and is well-meaning, but can also be a little bit hurtful in the fact that that assuming that the kids are better off with us than anybody else. And that reinforcing the idea of foster care is meant to be temporary, that this is, not a long-term solution, and that our goal is that kids are able to go back. And so also whenever we can, when people ask questions about the children, we focus on the positives of what the bio parents are doing and accomplishing. Not that we share any case plan information and we don't really have access to that, but just that visits are continuing and that the communication is there with families, and that's something that we really support and want to continue with.
Yeah, I grew up in a home that provided foster care, so I've been familiar with foster care for quite some time. And we talked about it very early on in our relationship of having an interest in doing this. And this is, our 7th, 8th year. So part of that is, having that familiarity with it from a young age. You get surprised at the level of curiosity that people have and some of the things they want to ask about. And some of it can be very invasive. So that was a surprise to learn early on, and how to navigate that and to reframe it in a positive way, so that the child isn't a bad thing that happened to them, but they're a child first.
Yeah. And I like that idea of, we talk about this in other aspects of our system, but using the child first language, people first language. You're not a foster kid, you're a kid in care, or a child in care. So I really like that aspect of it. I try and do that when I'm referring to, children in placement as well. So that really resonates. Manoush, is there something that we touch on when we're doing our resource parent training that you think, seeing that go through, that not a lot of people really thought about this at the beginning, but then you see that aha moment when they hear it, in a training session?
Yeah, absolutely. It really even starting from the inquiry phase when people are first expressing an interest and they're coming in for an information session. And then, of course, if they're interested in moving forward and they're part of the resource parent pre-service training, we spend a lot of time talking about the partnership, right? The role that the resource parent plays in maintaining those connections, in forging a partnership with the biological family. A lot of the things that Lauren and Justin touched on are things that we cover in the training, just to help prospective resource parents understand sort of the needs of children entering care, how to help them really heal and thrive, right? And that reunification piece, having that eye towards reunification and helping to maintain those connections, ways that they can invite, we have some resource parents who also, do a lot of the things that you all do, and they're, attending medical appointments with the biological families, or, co-planning the birthday parties, or at least making accommodations. We're going to have a birthday party with our family this weekend. When do you want to have the birthday party with your family, right? And just being flexible and accommodating and really keeping that at the forefront of the priorities for them in terms of making sure, the needs of the children are met, right? Because it's not just about the physical safety, but it's about that emotional well-being and that feeling of connectedness and belonging, that we touched on.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what's our current systems capacity for resource placements, and are there any special populations or, special considerations that we're thinking about when we're going out to recruit for resource parents? Because I know that it is a continuous recruitment process.
Yes, absolutely. So right now we have a little over 2,000 total resource families, kinship families. I would say we have about 1,300 traditional non-kin resource families. But we're, despite our kin first focus, we've made a kinship placement really a priority across the department, and we've made great strides in improving our placement with kin, because we know that children tend to have the best outcomes when they are in a familiar setting. But with that being said, I think it's really important for people to know there's still a real need for unrelated resource parents, right? For people to step up and be part of that proverbial village, right? They always say it takes a village to raise a child. And that's really true. And we need people who are interested and willing to become resource parents, right? To provide that safe healing space for children. And so right now, the greatest need is really for teens, for sibling groups, for our LGBTQ plus youth, for our youth who are cleared for adoption. And, children entering care typically have experienced some adversity or some trauma, so they may have increased behavioral health, medical, developmental needs. So that's really where we're focusing our recruitment efforts.
Great. Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that, even though our focus as a system has been to increase resource placements, and I think since 2021, now the majority of children that come into care are placed with kin, in familiar settings. But Lauren and Justin, you both talked about ways in which you're working to create familiarity in an unfamiliar setting. That you're thinking about some of the children's food, interests. So really thinking about like the children's appetites, what some of their favorite foods are, celebration of cultural milestones, holidays. So I think there's ways in which the traditional resource parents are also introducing familiarity, while recognizing that kinship placements do help outcomes, do help along reunification. But thinking about, and Lauren, I think you shared that some of the children that are in placement with you have, the family has maintained contact on around birthdays. You'll get an email and photos and such. I'm wondering if you can speak to what that looks like. When the bio parent reaches out and says, "Hey, child was just talking about you, or want to share that, we just had a graduation," or what does that look like?
I think it's a really noble thing of the birth parents to be able to do that, to reach back out after what I'm sure was probably the most difficult time in their life, and to maintain that connection and know that that's a positive thing for their child. I think that speaks volumes about their parenting and their care and the kind of future that they're building together. The communication that we've had, generally it's sparse, but it often comes around certain milestones or celebrations. And again, we try to defer to the birth parents about that kind of schedule or routine regarding communication. And when they do reach out, just to make sure that we're very responsive, get back to them right away, share our enthusiasm for the celebration, and, just to provide that encouragement, probably long after they're, the case is closed with the division, I hope that they think of us still as a resource for their child, and not something that is a procedural kind of relationship, but one that, we genuinely care about how you're doing and want to continue to see you succeed.
Manoush, how are we preparing resource families, traditional or kinship, to be a better support for the reunification process? What are the ways in which maybe we've changed our policies, maybe we've changed some of the training guidelines, but how are we preparing them to, contribute to reunification?
Yeah, so we have modified some of our pre-service training to put more of an emphasis on that and share some concrete strategies around, biological parent resource parent partnership. It's an ongoing conversation, honestly, right? So our staff are trained on this, and the resource support workers are continually having these conversations and helping to support resource families around how to do this. We've incorporated normalcy and the reasonable and prudent parent standard, right? So which really speaks to resource parents having the ability to make those normal everyday decisions around activities that the children might be engaging in to help them feel some sense of normalcy. And that can include, right, if they're used to having sleepovers at their aunt's house or at their cousin's house or, other extended family members, that they don't feel like they always have to get permission and it has to be like this long approval process through the division to try to get permission to do that they really should be allowed to make some of those decisions, right? As long as it's something that doesn't conflict with the case plan or anything that the caseworker may have already advised them about. But really, the resource parent family agreement that they sign contains some of that language in it. We have a resource parent handbook where we've included some of that information, right? So there's lots of different resources and ways that we try to message that out so that resource families are aware.
Last question, and this is always the forward-thinking question, because I DCF on the air exists to talk about transformation. So I always want to leave us like, what's happening now? Or how are we going to transform next? So I'm wondering, what's on the horizon for resource parenting and reunification from Manoush? And then after that, what are some of the ideas that you may have for us? Because we're always thinking about how do we, gather input and try and act on it.
So from a systems perspective, we are looking at our pre-service training to potentially really revamp it and include a lot more content that's, more engaging. There's different materials to suit different learning styles, right? And really puts a primary focus on that reunification piece and even content around managing intrusive questions, how to have conversations with children in care across different developmental stages. Like, how do you have those conversations in an appropriate way when they're asking about their family, when they're asking about why they're in care? So to really equip resource parents with the tools that they need up front, to be able to meet those needs. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we also, last year, we convened our first Resource Parent Council, and that consists of both kin and traditional resource parents who all came together, and they meet regularly to talk about, where they see challenges, what's working, what's not working, where we can make some improvements in strengthening our partnership, the supports and the training that's available to them. And one of the areas that they have touched on is around that education and awareness around, the best way to handle, forging that relationship with the birth family and how to navigate that when there are maybe some complexities there, right? So that's something that they're looking at. And they're actually in the process of, they've developed their priority areas that they want to focus on. And they're currently preparing to present those before Commissioner Byer next month. So definitely stay tuned. There'll be more to come on that. I'm sure there'll be some concrete action steps and strategies. They've been really innovative in their thinking around some of the solutions that they're proposing. And ultimately, I think it really comes down to embedding into our everyday practice and our interactions with our resource families just this philosophy that we need to recognize that resource families are valued partners and embracing them as true partners, right? Along with the casework team, along with the treatment team, therapists, right, and other professionals, as well as the birth family, that, we're all working collectively towards the same goal of keeping children and families safe, healthy, and connected, and really achieving that vision together as a true team.
Great. What do you think?
We're very fortunate to have created bonds with other resource parents, and one in particular that comes to mind is actually a resource parent in another state. So whole different set of policies and procedures in some ways, and it's really been nice to talk to them about some of the things that they're experiencing versus what we're experiencing, and that leads to some of that forward thinking of stuff that can happen in the future in that co-parenting model that's been talked about. And one of the things that they start out with, a week or two into it, is an icebreaker amongst all of the co-parents involved. And that gives them an opportunity to meet each other, to talk about the kids' likes and dislikes and what visits might look like and where they might happen, things like that. And so having that opportunity to talk to other resource parents to talk about what might be nice in the future is a really good opportunity as well. So the council is a great avenue for that.
That's great.
It was wonderful to hear Manoush talk about just the focus on reunification. Sometimes kids in care have questions about what is foster care, even though they're living the experience. What does this mean? How are things going to change? What's the future going to look like? And so continuing to just support resource families and how to dialogue and support the children through the questions that they have. And one thing that has just been unexpected, but really a gift, is that in our years of fostering, we have discovered just this expansive community of people who are quietly doing the right thing for kids and families. And whether or not they're licensed with the division or have a formal role with DCF, it's the nurses from the NICU that give you their cell phone number to help you with questions you might have about a medically fragile child. It's the aide at school who checks in. It's a neighbor who, we had an emergency placement and didn't have enough dressers and came home to find dressers on our front porch. And that they're, as a resource parent, you should feel encouraged to ask for what you need and to share about what you're doing and what it's like to be a resource parent. I think sometimes people maybe shy away from it, knowing that foster care can be complicated or confusing or, a time of disruption for families. But I think we've discovered the more that people are familiar with it, the better it is for the kids and the families in the long term. And we just continue to find people all over who've had some kind of connection to fostering, and just even if it's a nice conversation at the checkout line at the grocery store or something like that. We've had a lot of nice people at the supermarket who help us with our questions around WIC. And so it's looking for those moments. You'll be surprised how many there are, but there is just a growing community of people who genuinely want to see everybody succeed, and to support the kids.
And I think that, when people think about resource parents, right, they think that you have to be this like superhuman kind of person. And of course it takes a special kind of person to be a resource parent, but really, you just have to, I think, be open-minded and flexible. And if you have the willingness, I would really encourage people to learn more about it and what's involved, and the children entering care, what their needs are, because, we help. You don't have to come knowing everything, right? We help guide you through the process and give you some of that training and education and supports, and we can connect you to other resource families. We have our partners at Umbrella who are advocates for our resource parents and provide a lot of the in-service training and peer networking opportunities and things like that. So there's lots of resources and supports available. So if it's something that you're curious about or interested, in learning more about, I would really encourage people, take that first step. You're not committing to anything. Just go to our website. You can go to njfoster.org, njadopt.org, and use the link to enter your information, and you can come to an information session and just hear more. And even if you decide it's not right for you, you can be part of that community, right? That village that helps in other ways, helps spread the word, or you may know somebody, and now you have some of that information and knowledge that you could pass along to others in your community.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that this episode helps in, that education effort, that, by talking about this on DCF on the air, that's something that, someone might watch this and say, I'm interested, I want to learn more. So hopefully that spark happens. I'm wondering also if there's a final quote we want to share about, because you've had two really good ones. Do we want to go for the hat trick? If you can't think of one, I'm sure you actually said something that's very quotable and maybe hanging on somebody's refrigerator at some point someday soon. So thank you so much for participating in today's episode. I really appreciate the expertise and, that first-person experience of supporting kids in care. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for all that you do. It's really inspiring and I think very impactful, all of the information that you shared for others to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next month, we're going to be talking about a different aspect of our system, but one that also addresses some of the complexities and, the emotional difficulty of supporting kids who may have some additional needs. We're going to be talking to representatives from our family support organizations and some of the parents of children who may have intellectual or developmental disabilities, may have behavioral issues, but that are connected to the children's system of care. Whether you're coming at this journey of parenting as a parent with a child who has some additional needs, or you're coming at this as a resource parent who's providing a temporary safe harbor for a child who has experienced trauma and needs that safe space. We really value all parents at the Department of Children and Families. So on behalf of my producers, on behalf of the Department of Children and Families, the Office of Communications and Public Affairs, thank you for tuning in, and tune in next month for more DCF on the Air.